Everyone for joining us tonight. I see some familiar names from Monday, so really thrilled that you wanted to join us again to continue talking about conservation easements. Tonight we're also joined by Tom Scharffenbergi. You'll see Barbara and Alan and Larry from Monday as well, but Tom is here too. So in just a second, we'll introduce everybody again. After those introductions, each of the land trusts, Anderson Valley, Inland Mendocino County, and Mendocino Land Trust, will share a bit about some of the conservation easements that they hold and some experiences that they've had with those. And then we'll get into a conversation and Q&A with Tom Scharffenbergi. So that's what you can look forward to this evening. And just as a reminder, we are recording this, so it'll be available on the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District's YouTube page. And there's going to be a link to that on the website where you registered for this event. And at any time during the presentation, feel free to put your questions into the chat. We'll get to them. Probably we can start with them kind of in the middle of our evening and then keep asking them, and we can get Tom involved in those too. But please do stay muted unless we call on you to ask your questions. That'll just help with the recording and for things to go more smoothly. Just like to introduce you all, if you weren't here on Monday or would like a refresher, this group, Resource Conservation District and all these land trusts are part of a Mendocino County Sustainable Ag Lands Committee. Our goals are to conserve agricultural and natural resource lands while also encouraging responsible and balanced development in our county. All of these logos represent the different members of this committee, so it's quite diverse and good representation from a lot of the different partners who really care about these topics. So it's been a great partnership so far, and we're working all under this grant through Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation, and that's a program from Department of Conservation through the state, and we among other goals are trying to help educate the community about conservation strategies like Williamson Act. We had webinars in February about that, and then also about conservation easements. So feel free to read more about what we're doing on the website, again, where you registered on the Resource Conservation District's website. And I should mention that the SALC, Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation, is part of the California Climate Investments, which is a statewide program that puts billions of dollars of cap and trade funding to work, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment, and with a particular focus on disadvantaged communities. So I'd like to allow all of our presenters this evening to give a brief introduction about themselves and the organization they represent. I'll start with Barbara first.
Okay, from Anderson Valley Land Trust, and this is our 30th year working in Anderson Valley, helping landowners protect their land in perpetuity. And we have 27 easements that cover 2,400 acres, and we're working on, I think, 3 or 4 more now.
Thanks, Barbara. Your turn, Alan. Oh, you'll have to unmute, Alan.
Hello, I'm Alan Nicholson from the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust. It's a small, all-volunteer land trust that works to preserve and conserve land in the Russian River watersheds. We have a board, and it is all volunteer, so sometimes things go very slowly. We've been in existence since 2001. And we have 2 conservation easements. One is 1,100 acres in Potter Valley, and it includes bottomland, rangeland, conifer forests, and the ridgetop overlooking and Redwood Valley. And we have another 187 acre easement in Redwood Valley with mixed forest. And so that's the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, your turn, Larry.
I guess that's me then. So I'm Larry Turner. I work for the Mendocino Land Trust. We're based out here in Fort Bragg, but we work all over the county, our very large county. We were founded in 1976, and I misquoted us on Monday. I said that we had over 7,000 acres conserved, which is true, but we actually have over 16,000 acres conserved. Over 7,000 are acres of family-owned land. So that's kind of what I meant to differentiate there. We have a number of projects in the works. I'm hoping if all goes well this year, we'll do another 7,000 acres during the year if we're lucky. So there we are.
Great. Thanks, Larry. And how about you, Tom?
Hello, folks. Can you hear me okay? All
Yes.
right. I'm calling you from Colorado, but I'm a conservation consultant. I work with land trusts and families, private landowners on conservation planning and transactions. And I'll be talking to you, I guess, later about different things from landowners' perspectives about how you get involved with conservation easements and the whole planning process. So, great.
Thanks. We're so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Now we're going to do a quick overview of some of the conservation easements that we have in our county. I'm going to start with Anderson Valley and pass it off to Barbara.
Okay. Before I talk about Filigreen Farm, I just thought I should mention too that it's not per se, I guess, an agricultural easement, but Scharffenbergi Sellers, it's one of our first easements actually, gave up the water rights and the whole watershed to Indian Creek, which borders their land in Philo. And so we have a conservation easement on Indian Creek and the escarpment that goes up to the vineyard. And they do not take water out of Indian Creek anymore because of that easement. And okay, so now Filigreen Farm. This is a conservation easement that we did, I think, in 2002. And it is owned by the Eagle Foundation and leased to Chris and Stephanie Tabbitt. It's just outside of Boonville, 87 acres on Anderson Creek. And the conservation easement assures its availability for the permanent use of biodynamic and organic agriculture. And so forever, it has to be left available so that it could be farmed. It's a diversified working farm with tree fruits, blueberries, olives, wine and table grapes, veggies, flowers, livestock, and an apiary. The conservation includes residential, agricultural, riparian, and forest zones. The forest zone is not very large. There's just some oak woodland and some forest. And Patrick Miller got these 2 slides together this morning. They're rather interesting. The creek that you see is Anderson Creek. And on the left is a slide that shows an aerial view from 1998. And you can see how graded that the river or the creek is. It's very wide. And if you were close to it, what you would see is very shallow and a lot of gravel, and that the riverbed goes back and forth a lot, depending on the season, but it's very graded. And when Chris and Stephanie started with Filigreen Farm, they started an extensive restoration project on this creek. And it's really a model program. They planted trees, put in gabions, put willow thatching. If this was a bigger photo, you might even be able to see any of it. But they reduced the river, I think it was from a couple 100 feet wide to 80 feet. So it stays in its banks now, and you can see the greenery there. And so they gained an immense amount of farmland with that on each side of the creek. And they, with this, they also have done a lot of water revitalization. They have great, I think it's called Fibonacci curve, and they intersperse the water with all kinds of energy. And it's really fascinating if you ever have a chance to get there. And they do a lot of carbon sequestration just naturally with their biodynamic farming and not importing much of anything from outside. They create their own manure and energize their own water for fertilizer. And this photo is not all the people that work there. It was a tour that Anderson Valley Land Trust did of the farm about 5 years ago, I think. But within the conservation easement, it allows actually 4 families to live on the farm. And there's further expansion for that too, that's allowed in the future. They want to do a lot more environmental education and have a farm intern program. And so they have a space where some housing could be. And that was anticipated before and is allowed in the conservation easement. And 6 families run the farm, but only 4 live there at this point. So this is inland Mendocino County. Alan.
Thank you. I wanted to show a conservation easement in Redwood Valley. This is part of the Frey family properties. They own quite a bit of property along Tom Kai Road, going from Redwood Valley up to Tom Kai Canyon. We've held this conservation easement since 2002, and it's 187 acres of mixed inland county habitat in Redwood Valley. There's oak woodland, dry chaparral hills above, and deep canyons containing ponderosa pine, fir, and redwood forests with some old growth and 2 creeks running through it year round. This is a property that was going to be logged by a logging company, and the Freys and some neighbors got together and purchased the land to preserve it. So they saved it from logging and have tried to preserve it and manage it in a sustainable fashion. There are 187 acres. There's several habitation zones for family dwellings, with all future development restricted, preserving the conservation values of the easement. The property has been designated as an educational resource for the public by reservation only, but school children have come, different groups have come to admire the mature redwoods and firs and see the habitat, the animals, birds, and it's also a frequent destination for neighbors to walk over and see the beautiful property. Adjacent to the conservation easement is a family winery and vineyards that support this easement land. So this is 187 acres that is separate and preserved from already developed land. And this will be preserved in perpetuity. In 2017, there was a terrible fire, and the land and habitat were brutally altered in the 2017 firestorm known as the Mendocino complex fires, which burned over 36,000 acres. And you can see from this picture, which was a very lush forest. It's a bunch of burned over sticks now, with most of the forest lands decimated. The Freys and the Inland Mendocino County Land Trust have been trying to keep erosion to a minimum and restore the forests after the fire. So no matter how well we planned for a conservation easement, sometimes nature has its own agenda. And so conservation easements need to be considered as some flexibility in it to adapt to natural disasters like floods, like fires, and also climate change, global warming, droughts. Looks like we're going to have a pretty dry year this year, and all these natural phenomena have big impacts on the land when they're unforeseeable. So we're becoming more and more aware of this as in writing conservation easements and planning them, is to look into ways that we can adapt to natural changes in our climate. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. It's my turn, I think. So I wanted to show the diversity of some of our conservation easements. I do not plan on reading everything that you see on these slides, so I'll let folks take a look. But you'll see, I think what you'll notice across the 4 slides is that there's some things that are similar and some things that are very different. And part of what I spoke about on Monday was that the restricted and prohibited rights, which are different in every easement. And at the very end, I got to use our business manager's favorite term, which is that every conservation easement is its own special snowflake. And I think these slides kind of show that. So the first one I wanted to show you is Dark Horse Ranch. And every one of these easements has stunningly beautiful pictures that go with it, which was amazing. Dark Horse Ranch, which is over in Hopland, 156 acres, they are biodynamic. So they're doing all sorts of different kinds of farming on there. Not only do they have vineyards, they also do cattle and sheep. They raise olives, and they do some beekeeping out there. They are one of 2 that we have that are a fish-friendly farm, meaning that they farm in ways that are fish-friendly. With any runoff will not harm the fish in any of the streams. One of the special things on this one as well is they have 2 residents. They have 2 building envelopes for residences. So that all can get customized on your conservation easement depending on what you need for your family. Katie, can I have the next one for me, please? Is it? There we go. Bonterra is another biodynamic farm, very famous. You'll see their wines out in the stores. They are very similar to Dark Horse. They had one of their rights that they reserved on the easement. It was larger, and they retained a right for subdivision, for one subdivision, which they exercised. So what happened was, where we had one conservation easement, suddenly we had two. So the easement stayed on both properties, but they were two separate, they're now two separate easements with two separate owners. So that made this kind of unique. So that was one of the retained rights on this particular easement. All right, Katie, can I have the next one, please? Is it just lagging over here a little bit on the computer? God bless the computers. This is the Galbreath and Johnson Ranch over in Yorkville. It's a pretty big one. They used to have a timber harvest plan as one of their retained rights. They let go of the THP, although it could be updated, but it's more of a managed forest. They did not exercise. So just because you have it doesn't mean you have to do that. They also have ranch land out there. They still have a home, but nobody's living in it. It's more of a family house that folks visit. This one is interesting because it's adjacent to Sonoma State Preserve, so it's creating a continuous zone of conserved or non-developed land. And they also now lease, they retain the right to lease their ranch out so that there's now cattle ranching on it versus the sheep ranching that used to be there. So that's yet another retained right that they've exercised and made it work for them. So that's how they've made it work for this family. And then I've got one more. I know I'm going through them pretty quick here, but I want to get to our main speaker. And there it is, Ridgewood Ranch. This is one of the most interesting ones we have. Some of you may also know it as the property that belongs to the Church of the Golden Rule. And they own 5,000 acres and they've conserved a little over 1,600. So nothing says you have to put a conservation easement over your entire property. Of course, all of us here who are way into conservation would love to see more land conserved, but this was their best option at the time when they did that. They have a little bit of everything going on out there. Their claim to fame is that they are home of Seabiscuit, and they now also have the Seabiscuit Therapeutic Riding Center and Horse Program, which is a very cool thing. They have a charter school out there. They've got oak woodlands. They've got forest land. They've even got a grove of preserved old growth redwood out on that property. So it's a very, very diverse property. They have a very interesting arrangement with their farming. They lease the farming out, and it's not always the same person. So they may have multiple people farming or multiple families farming on that land. And they call that the Tequio Community Farm. So they have different arrangements going on to maintain the farming and the agriculture on that land. So before we get to Tom, can anyone guess which of those 4 easements I got our truck stuck on?
Ridgewood.
No, not really. It was Dark Horse Ranch. So it just they have the oldest, some of the oldest vineyards out there, and I thought I was going to take out 120-year-old Zinfandel with the truck. Zinfandel happens to be my favorite wine, so I was very upset by that. Paul Dolan, the owner, was such a good sport about it, but the truck did sit there for 2 weeks before we yanked it out with a tractor and then drove it back home. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thanks, everyone. I will say I was sampling there a few weeks ago, and they specifically told me not to go in certain places. So maybe because they didn't want my truck to get stuck. Well, thanks for sharing all of those. It's nice to have some great visuals to go along with the good stories about all those conservation easements. And I'd like to kind of, I don't know, open it up to Tom to see if you'd like to specifically talk about some of these before we open it up for questions, or how would you like to do that?
Let's see, I'm either way, you know, I can just talk for 10 minutes about my experience with families going through the process of doing conservation easements, and then ask for questions, and then, you know, elaborate more as people have certain types of questions. So if that makes sense.
I think that sounds great. And do you need this slide on, or could we just go to a shared squares?
Yeah, you can. And I'm sorry, I don't have slides to show. So you can put on a nice photo of one of those past ranches, might be nice. So yeah, that's good. because
we
I'm
can
going to skip
even-
around in some of these things. So
Yeah, how about we just
Okay.
stop the share and you can just see everybody.
Okay, sure. Hey, everyone. First of all, I have to say, I really appreciate being part of this. I don't have the best, I'm on vacation at a ski resort in Colorado. We don't have the best reception, so I hope you can all hear me as I go along. Things were breaking up a little bit, and I'm worried that, just wave your hand if you say, Tom, we can't hear you anymore. You're freezing in that Zoom call. So anyway, those are beautiful slides of all those amazing easement projects. And so just to give you a background of what I do, I'm actually a landscape architect and a land planner. I've been working in the conservation field for, I think, over 35 years. And I help land trusts and private landowners in conservation planning and then transactions. Some of my projects are, I would say most of my projects involve conservation easements, but not all of them. Some of them were planning ended up being, sale and fee to add to parks and things like that, but mostly it's conservation easements. So let me just get started about working with how as a landowner, how do you get going on this kind of thing? What would you do to get started? And the thing I should say before you do anything is you probably have to back up a little bit and do the really painful step for most families, which is to start thinking about the future and what's going to happen to our land after we all pass and the next generation might inherit it or not. So you want to ask those questions. What do you want your property to be in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and after your lifetime when your kids inherited it? Many of the people who I've worked with, landowners, have been motivated about the legacy of their land, the conservation values of their land, and ensuring that their children can, if their children are interested, to continue the farming operations, etc. So they go through the estate planning process. And sometimes I'm involved in that early process with the family. A lot of times larger ranches, people have to see maps. Sometimes you have the children who are interested, who are working with their parents on the operations of the property, and others who have moved away and are not interested would just as well not inherit the land, have it be sold so they can, use the money and go on to what they do. So, anyway, the thing you need to ask, and this gets into conservation easements if you're going to consider those, is, most basically, will the land stay in your family? If so, will one or more members of the next generation be involved in the actual operations of the land, if it's forestry, agricultural, whatever? And then are they going to be interested in residing on the land? Will they need, can they live in the existing house that the parents are living in right now, or will they need more houses? And also, will there be other people operating the farm? Will there be a need for agricultural employee housing? So all this gets into all these decisions then get into the easement itself, the conservation easement, and how it's structured. And I'll just say that I don't have to get into this too much, but some of the families I've worked with, it's very painful to kind of go through this process. So sometimes, instead of just sitting down and all talking about it, which is basically how you should get started. But if there's difficult things about emotions and stuff like that, sometimes we do a family questionnaire so people can answer questions about the land and how they see their future in it without any intimidations from other, family members or whatever. So we do it that way. And sometimes in very difficult and valuable properties, where there's a lot of money at stake, we sometimes bring in a facilitator to help the family kind of guide them through the whole process of getting to a final consensus agreement of where we all want to go as a family. Some kids will be bought out, other kids will stay in, that kind of thing. These are things the land trusts don't get involved with too much, but they're important to have happen before the land trust can help the families get involved to save their properties. And I just want to say there's various people you want to work with early. Once you figure out your family thing and you figure, well, yes, we all want to keep our land going and we like to consider conservation easements, whether for legacy reasons or money reasons or whatever motivations to get involved with conservation easements. It's important to think about who you might want to get to assist you with some and some of you will have an estate attorney helping you. Many of the landowners I've worked with go immediately to their accountant because if they're going to be selling, for instance, selling a conservation easement, they want to know what are the tax consequences of that, or if they're even donating, what are the tax consequences? Sometimes they need to get a tax attorney involved, etc. One of the most important things, though, I get involved as a planner on some properties. Often, landowners don't need a planner like me to help them through this. They can just work with the land trust. But most important to know as a landowner is that you should not rely on the land trust to help you draft your easement. They will draft an easement. They're supposed to do that. But you need your own attorney to kind of review it with you, to help you understand it, to help you negotiate language that the land trust may or may not be happy with. Often, sometimes you're going to find that 95% of the language, both the landowner and the land trust are happy with, but there might be some difficult things. Perhaps the agencies who give the funding for the easements won't allow the land trust to budge on certain language things. So it's very important to engage at some point your own attorney and not a family attorney. I'm talking about an attorney who understands conservation easements. There are a number of them in California, and they can help you get quickly to smooth the way to getting the end result, which is the easement transacted. So just want to throw that in. My wife's one of these attorneys, so that's maybe why I kind of know that's very important. But generally, land trusts often feel uncomfortable when landowners often don't get their own attorney too, because it's hard for to move forward without getting someone involved on your side as a landowner side. So one other thing I want to just say is how much as a landowner, often people ask me, well, how much does this all cost? And basically, the main cost to the landowners are hiring your attorney to help you with the easement itself, negotiating the easement, and if they're experienced, those costs won't be that much. If you hire an attorney who's like your family attorney to do this, they're going to maybe charge way too much because they don't understand how easements work. But the main cost, so there's that, and you may want to get some help from a planner and your accountant. Probably the largest cost to you, and this can be negotiated, but most land trusts, to be able to move forward, they need sometimes some initial planning help. The cost for applying for the easement, etc. But ultimately, they're going to ask you for something called a stewardship endowment. Did you guys talk about that in the last?
Very much. Only
okay.
did it.
Yeah. So as you know, easements are perpetual; they're forever, and the land trusts have to, over time, they have to yearly monitor your easement, which is not a big deal, but there are costs involved. But most importantly, over time, not maybe in your ownership, but maybe down the line when your kids sell the land to someone else, there may be some issues where there were violations of the easement terms. People might have put a shed in the wrong place or a house or something. So part of the responsibility of the land trust is to enforce the easement over time. And you want them to do that too. I mean, this is a legacy decision. You don't want your easement to just fall apart over time. So what the land trust asks is is a stewardship endowment. Often in many of the land trusts I work with in Central Valley, sometimes it's figured out on a formula, but more often than not, it represents somewhere between 4 and 6% of the easement value. Just to give you a ballpark, and you guys tell me if that's not quite how you work it out. But that's your main cost. So if the easement value is, say, I don't know, 500,000, then the stewardship cost would be 25,000. So that's the big cost to you. Now that stewardship endowment can be structured to be a donation and can qualify for charitable deduction. So that's one thing to realize. So the money you're putting into the land trust, you can get some of it back in as a tax deduction. So the other costs, there are different costs to landowner, but actually, if you add up all the costs of doing these transactions, it comes out to be the same as if you were just selling a property in fee and you got a realtor involved and you had to pay them, their percentage or whatever. So it's somewhere between the total to use, probably going to be 70. It's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10% of the easement value when all is said and done to do these transactions. There are one of the things the land trusts need to do before they can transact the easement is they have to make sure you have what's called good title. So if there are any liens on your property, it's a good idea to get those cleaned up right away, get those off your property, resolve those, if you will. When you most landowners have a deed of trust on their property, which is fine, that's okay, but the deed of trust and all things like that have to be the easement has to become superior to any other prior interests. So what happens is your deed of trust has to be subordinated to the easement, and there is some costs in that. But most lenders now understand conservation easements and are willing to do that. And they'll explain how to do that. But that's one thing you should, as a landowner, you have to do. If you have a lease on your land, you also have to have the leaseholder sign a subordination to the easement as well. So there's some title issues like that you have to do. Let's see, where are we time wise? I was just looking. Okay, so. The other thing is, so you're wanting to move forward, and you've talked to various people, like maybe your accountant, and you at some point you're going to get an attorney, but mostly very soon you're going to just work directly with the land trust folks are all good, and they know, they're going to help you in any way they can. If there's funding to help purchase your easement, they'll want to do that. If help you get that funding. But in order to just start, a discussion they're going to have with you is what's special about your land? What are your conservation values? They can be agricultural. In other words, do you have land? Or do you have vineyards or orchards, row crops? Do you have good soils, etc.? They're going to document all that. To help you move forward. They're going to look at things, rare species or habits, if that's maybe important to them or to you. They'll look at riparian and other water resources, whether you have streams that support steelhead. Do you have redwoods or other types of forest? Do you have a piece of land that's very important in the sense that it's right next up, it's right against an existing park? Or do you have a piece of land that's right up against a growing city like Ukiah? So all those things are important, and they're important for the land trust to know first. As the board's going to get together, their staff is going to do a presentation to the board, and they're all going to say, hey, we like this piece of land, we would like to help this landowner conserve it with the conservation easement. They make that decision, and then they make that decision too to spend money or work with you to get possibly to apply for funding. The agencies that are applying for the funding often have a rating system, and they give points to all these things about your land, your habitats, your agricultural resources, that kind of thing. So it's important for them to establish that early on. Let's see. So anyway, so they gather all that information, they make a decision to move ahead with you, and then they apply for funding. Then a very important thing gets done. It either gets done before they apply for the funding or after, and it's the appraisal of the easement itself. How much is the land worth? This is if they're applying for funding. The appraisal is, did you guys go into appraisals and how they work? Okay. So the conservation easement appraisals are a little bit more complicated than appraising just land in fee, like you're selling your house or something like that. For appraisals of conservation easements, the appraisal are actually just two appraisals. One is two parts of their appraisal. One is, what is the land worth without the easement on it? What's the fair market value of the easement of your ranch or whatever? And then they then appraise, okay, what would the same land be worth subject to the restrictions of the conservation easement, encumbered by the easement? So they get two values. One, your high value of what your total land value is, and two, what would your land be now subject to the easement? And the difference between those two values is the easement value. And in California, easements have been, the ratio of the easement value to the fair market value have been all over the map. In the Central Valley, they're typically anywhere from 25% to 40% of the fair market value. I don't know what they are in Mendocino, but anyway, that just gives you a sort of a general idea. In Santa Clara County, where I've been working, where a lot of these easements have a lot of the properties they're trying to protect are right in the in these towns that are growing, like Gilroy and Morgan Hill. They can sometimes, the easement value can be 50 or 60%, but I think mostly in rural areas, somewhere between 25% and 40% is more the norm. So just give you that idea, and just you guys let me know if that's not in keeping with what you're finding. So, let's see. So the big question is about the appraisal is, first of all, who pays for it? In the SALC program, which I think you guys all talked about, the agricultural program, the nice thing is that if the deal goes through, if the funding application is accepted and the transaction goes all the way to the end, the SALC program, the Department of Conservation, will reimburse the land trust or the landowner, whoever paid for these. They'll reimburse the cost of the appraisal. But in many cases, some of the other kind of funding through the WCB and others, they don't have that. So often it's negotiated between who should pay for the appraisal. In that case, the land trust would want the landowner to pay for the appraisal, because they're a nonprofit. They don't have a lot of money to just appraise everybody's land. So just keep that in mind. And the cost of appraisals because I mentioned they're a little bit more complicated. You're probably used to, a real estate transaction, simple appraisals costing $2,000 to $3,000, but easement appraisals have to be done by certain people who understand how they're done. They cost somewhere between, I think the cheapest one I'm seeing now are anywhere between $7,000 and up to $20,000, but more in the $7,000 to $9,000 range, I would say, for simple, straightforward agricultural conservation easement appraisals. So, again, the landowner in the land trust has to make a decision about when the appraisal should be done. Often because they don't know if for sure they're going to apply for funding, hopefully apply for funding for your property. They don't know at that point. They may have a good sense that they're going to get the funding, or they may not. So there's a risk of doing the appraisal, the cost of the appraisal. So, and also as a family member, you don't really know what the value will be until the appraisal is done. So at any rate, in these days, I think what's happening now with most of the agencies, including the Department of Conservation, they will allow land trust to, based on what the land trusts know of other transactions in the area, they'll allow them to estimate the value without having to go through the full appraisal or any of the appraisal process. And then if they get the application funding, then they can do the appraisal. So they're not, no one's at risk for doing an expensive appraisal ahead of time. They will, same goes with the cost of doing the legal costs of drafting a conservation easement. The land trust will give you sort of a basic boilerplate plate or model easement, so you can look at that, knowing that it's going to be completely tailored to your property. So many of the provisions of the easement won't be the same, but they can wait until they know that the land trust will wait until anyone spends a lot of money on easement drafting until after they get the okay from the agency, and then everybody. What typically happens is the land trust drafts the easement. It's their easement, they draft it, they give it to the landowner, and they draft it based on, you sort of agree to terms beforehand, but they draft it, and then the owner gets it, they get to review it, they review it with their attorney, and then propose changes to it. And it may go through 2, 3, 4 drafts before it's finalized. And each time the land trust looks at it and they say, well, this looks good, but now we have to ask the agency if they're okay with that change in language. So the agency has some say in this too. So just, you should know that. Okay, so one of the things we're going to talk about is shaping and planning your conservation easement. This is done early on with the land trust and maybe with your attorney. Again, without getting into the full drafting of the easement, you're going to think about the basic terms of the conservation easement. Most easements are similar in that they, you guys talked about easements. The easements prohibit subdivision. They restrict buildings within one or more kind of building areas, which are defined ahead of time. But they'll work, the land trust will work with the landowner to carefully tailor the easement to the needs of the family and the land itself, what the needs are. And then again, I mentioned some of the agencies have their own boilerplate language that's hard to change, but your attorney that you hire will help you kind of understand where you have negotiating room for easement language and where you don't. So we talked about appraisals. So I want to just say generally something I'm seeing now and a lot of people are seeing in the Central Valley and other places where I'm working down Santa Clara County is that that agricultural land has gotten very valuable in generally in California, so that true agricultural like cropland and things like that, that means because there's less development pressure. There's always development pressure on agricultural land, but because agricultural land itself is very valuable, the easement values are getting to be a little bit less than where they were maybe 5 years ago. This is what appraisers are telling us and stuff. It still I don't want to discourage you though as a landowner for considering this conservation easements. That amount less isn't that much less, but it's just something to be aware of. The value of your easement really depends on two things, but mostly it depends on the relative value of your easement is how much development pressure is on your property, because that's what a developer, when people talk about highest and best use, it usually means what someone can do with that land to make money. And typically in California, that means subdividing it and selling it, to various landowners, or to convert forest lands to vineyards. There's also some pressures there too, certain agricultural pressures as well. So, so people who are close to cities, for instance, who have a big property next to Kaya, say, or something like that, will have potentially a lot of a high conservation easement value relative to others. However, probably anywhere in Mendocino County, you also have in rural lands this pressure, people wanting to break lands up into little ranchettes to live on, especially along that 128 corridor. I'm seeing in Anderson Valley, you see, redwood forest being split up for whatever, marijuana farms or something. So there's pressures everywhere, probably throughout Mendocino, which means appraisal values will be relatively high, but again, probably within that 25 to 40% range of ratio compared to the land's full value. So, all right. So I probably talked too much. Is there any? Maybe we can open it up to questions now or so.
Sure. I'd just like to give the Land Trust a chance to comment on anything that you said, or give some, specific details.
Well, that was a great talk, Tom. Nice overview of the process and some of the issues to consider, costs and pulling in professionals at the right time for consulting. A very nice overview of the whole process. The Inland Mendocino County Land Trust doesn't have as much experience of some of the other ones in Mendocino County, the other land trusts, but time-wise, I think that's also a kind of a good thing to talk about for prospective conservation easements. I know it depends on whether it's a donated easement or a funded easement. There's usually added timelines for funded easements depending on where and how the money is coming. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, that was actually in my outline. Timing of easements. So funded easements typically take anywhere from a year to a year and a half to complete, because it really depends on where some of these agencies want the applications in, they have a deadline just once a year. So wherever you are relative to that deadline, you may be right on the button, or you may have to wait a while, a whole year maybe, before the land trust can actually apply for that funding. Appraisals typically take 3 to 4 months. And then all the other little things that have to be done for easement properties, the title issues to be cleaned up, the drafting of the easement. Every easement has a baseline study done for it. They don't take a lot of time, whatever. But I would say figure at least a year to a year and a half for most. Now, donated easements where you don't involve the agencies, there's still some time. The family will want to have an appraisal done because likely it's going to be, they're going to have a tax deduction based on that appraisal. So that's going to take the 3 or 4 months. And then there's the same steps of negotiating the easement language and doing the cleaning up title and the baseline. So I'd say you might get away with those, 10 to 12. I'd still figure a year maybe. Lawrence or anyone, do you guys have any thoughts about timing?
It takes at least that long, I think. By the time you go back and forth, you get the legal wranglings, find the appraiser, handhold through the sticker shock of appraisal, and then a few other things.
Yeah. One thing I found, not all appraisers do this, but one thing that a landowner should know if they're getting involved, especially in the upfront costs of the appraisal, and they don't really know if it's going to be the right price for them to move forward. Some appraisers will go through all their main analysis, getting the comparable sales and stuff like that, and come up with a preliminary value and let you know that. And then you can just say, okay, we're just paying you for that. We're not going forward. So that might be somewhere between 50 to 70% of the actual costs of the appraisal. And then you have the choice, yes, move forward. That range of values or that value you gave us as a preliminary value makes sense. Finish it up and we'll pay you the rest. So you can phase in. Some appraisers do it, but not all. Some are adamantly against doing it that way. So just keep that in mind.
Can you talk a little bit about the ramifications of doing a voluntary easement that's donated as opposed to an easement that you might get a grant for?
Right. Yeah. Again, each of these agencies that have money available to purchase easements or whatever have specific goals in mind. There's the Department of Conservation's SALC programs, and they are really looking at, mostly properties, good agricultural properties, but also some ranch lands as well, that one, have good resources on them, agricultural resource, and two, that are threatened by development. So if you're out of their kind of risk categories, you likely aren't going to get money for. And then, donating easements, it's really a family decision. I mean, some families just love their land so much and want to see a legacy, to provide a legacy to their kids or to their community, to protect it. They'll donate it. And so then you really want to talk, though still it's a financial decision. You want to talk to a tax attorney to help you think through how the appraisal is done. It has to be done a certain way. With donated easements, do a little bit differently than others. There's some language that the IRS needs in there. But one of the tax benefits, of course, is that you're donating a chunk of value to a nonprofit. So depending on what tax bracket you're in, if you're the higher tax bracket, you can, I shouldn't talk because I don't know for sure what the rates are now, but whatever those high, it's just like donating money to a charity, like a cancer charity or something like that. So, but anyway, you'll want to talk to a tax attorney, and you have to go through some of the steps. But the land trust, keep in mind, the land trust still has to, they need to do over time all the things that they would have to do with any easement. So in addition to donating the value of your easement to the land trust, who will hold the easement, they will expect that you also give them, a stewardship endowment too, that, whatever that is, and that can, that might be negotiated. So, yeah.
Well, feel free to pop on the video or put a question in the chat. Anybody who has questions. For now, I know that Amy might have a question too. She'd mentioned one earlier.
Well, Tom actually answered a lot of them. One of the things I had big questions about is what the timeline was like. And this has been touched on a lot, but just a takeaway, why should landowners be interested in pursuing a conservation easement? What are the benefits to the landowner?
Sorry, go ahead and try to answer that. Okay, so yeah, so they are a number of the biggest ones probably are financial and sort of estate planning, legacy things, issues as well. But I think, you know, it's best to mostly think of it in terms, start with the, you know, the higher plane. Even though we're all good natured people, we want to, you know, see things conserved over time. You want to think about the financial impacts of an easement to your family, both pro and con. I think for a lot of families that I've worked with in agricultural regions throughout the Central Valley, in Sonoma County, in Santa Clara County, you know, they're mostly financial reasons, and they're people who are really into the whole business of being in farming, and their kids want to do it. You probably won't want to do this if your kids aren't into it, but maybe you will nonetheless. And it's a way of taking basically paper value, if you will, this development potential of your land, and converting it into cash, and helping your family move forward. You can pay off loans, you can buy equipment, you can have a nest egg for a relative who needs medical help over time. There's a lot of reasons why families do conservation easements, but it's mostly that financial one where they want to keep the farming going in their family. Yeah, so I would say that's the majority of at least the ones that my clients have been. Yeah.
Thank you. That's
yeah.
Good, thorough answer.
Sure.
Tom?
Yes, Patrick.
Can you hear me? Nice to see you.
Sure.
It's been a while.
Nice to see you. It has, yeah.
It has. A couple of questions. One is in your presentation of the appraisal process, it sounded as if the land trust would be involved in that. And I thought it's much better to be totally divorced from the appraisal process. That's between the owner and the IRS. And it doesn't really affect what a land trust would do. So that's question one.
Oh, absolutely.
Question two is, yesterday we had a little discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Question two is, yesterday or 2 days ago, sort of a loose end came up, and that is, well, with global warming, climate change, let's say, what happens if the farm just goes bust because there's no water or you know, it's too hot, you know, you can't even grow Zin grapes anymore. I mean, it's so hot. It'd be, you know, desertification. And wouldn't most easements then have a clause that says, well, it then will be open space?
Possibly, but let me ask, try to answer your first one. So, you know, you're really right. So for donated easements, because I deal mostly with people who are getting money for easements. Right. So people are getting money for easements. That appraisal belongs to the land trust. It is the land trust appraisal.
When an easement is purchased.
It's purchased by the land trust. It is their appraisal. Now they can get and it's not unreasonable for them to ask the landowner to help subsidize that, but the agencies actually require that the appraisal is written for the land trust. They're addressed as it can be used by the landowner for whatever reasons, but it's the land trust appraisal. Has to be that way. Now, donated easements are different. Donated easements are that you're absolutely right, but the land trust can't be completely divorced from the, now maybe not the appraisal process, but in the end, after the transaction of the donated easement, I think the land trust is required to have a copy of the appraisal to know what the
Yes.
values are. And
And
there's a
fill
form
out-
that
We
they
signed
fill-
Form 82, 83.
80, exactly, yeah. So it behooves the land trust not to get involved too much, to kind of understand that appraisal and make sure the land trust can get in trouble if they work with or the landowner's working with appraisal to give just, kind of a inflated value of the easement that's not realistic, and then the IRS comes back, and then then the land trust can get in trouble for that. So,
Particularly if it's a big estate on the Hudson River.
yeah, exactly. But it happens in California too. So, yeah. So I would still, work with the landowner. Again, you're right. It's the landowner's appraisal in that case, because they're gonna the appraisal has to be submitted to the IRS along with the basic form that they provide for that. Yeah. So and then there's different situations. You could have a farm, not just due to global warming, but what if urbanization gets completely surrounds it and it becomes impractical to farm anymore? And land trusts have been trying to grapple with those issues for a long time. I think maybe you're right about agricultural easements. People should know there's different kinds of easements. They're basically all the same. They're a conservation easement, but agricultural conservation easements are in terms of the restrictions are probably the least restrictive, because there's no habitats involved or anything like that. You're allowed to do any kind of agriculture you want over time. Sometimes there are agricultural easements that restrict certain kinds of they for instance restrict or prohibit vineyards and orchards and permanent crops. But that's in a way, it's a habitat easement. It's done in the Central Valley to protect Swainson hawks and things. But easements, the main agencies are taxpayers who have, basically us, have decided it makes sense to protect agriculture over time, even though we don't know what's going to happen to that agricultural land, but the soils below it, below that agriculture basically are always going to be there unless they're paved over with something. And once they're paved over, they're gone forever. So I think you're right. You probably need to have some kind of flexibility for, agricultural easements don't require that people do agriculture on them. I don't know if there's no easements are only negative in what they in the restrictions. They can't say you have to do something. So there are some easements now that they're working with that are that are written that way, but mostly they're not. So if you can no longer do agriculture on them, then it's really a matter of the courts and the state to decide whether the easement can be undone for whatever reason, right? And that's very difficult. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a provision in the state civil code for forest conservation easements if they're funded, that they are required to practice good forest management and fire reduction. That's it's new to me, but I was just made aware of it. I think it was a law passed about 5 years ago. So that's, if there is funding for a forest preserve, then there's also a responsibility that goes with that, which could be somewhat costly. So it's not demanding that that agriculture happen, but there is forest management that needs
No,
to be.
and actually, you brought up a really good point, Alan, because there's a lot of properties where land trusts want to get involved to make sure they continue in agriculture or they have good forestry practice or whatever. So they can't do the typical form where everything is, it's just all negative restrictions. So the way they get around that is they work with landowners to get them to agree to an agricultural management plan or a forestry management plan that they can then, together with the landowners and whoever is creating this management plan, sometimes the landowner, sometimes the consultant, but it will make sure that positive things, positive as opposed to negative, management things are the result. We don't, SALC doesn't really deal with those that much, the SALC program, but yeah, there are definitely many of the larger properties I've worked on that have timber properties have management plans. So they're proactive things that they have to do over time or metrics they have to meet or whatever.
Kathy, would you like to ask your question out loud?
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I am. Okay, so I'm not that sophisticated about using taxes and gaining money through taxes, but if this was done, is the financial gain in terms of your taxes only good for that one tax year? Or are the
Very good question.
Yeah, or can it be extended? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's
okay. Yes. So the IRS, working with conservation organizations, has a specific rule that conservation easement deductions, if they value where they become a deduction, if the deduction can't be all used in 1 year, it can be rolled over a number of years. I think, is it 15 years now, or
I think so.
I think it's 15 years. Yeah,
that's a good chunk of time. Yeah.
it is. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm concerned, I guess, with my property, considering it, is that it was caught in the wildfire, like the Frey. I'm a neighbor to the Freys.
Okay.
So my land
Sorry.
has parts that were severely burned. We've done some salvage logging. So I'm not sure how much difference there would be in terms of appraised value on my property. So because a lot of it,
yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it was a magnificent piece of property with forest, before the fire, but it's definitely damaged.
Right.
So I guess there's no question. I guess.
Well, right. It's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I am working with another landowner in Sonoma County who has his land was burned completely to the ground, his house and stuff. So I don't know. I mean, you still have to go through the appraisal process. Now, remember, the appraisers are appraising a number of things. So if your timber is gone, obviously you don't have that value anymore, both in the before or after condition. But you're probably still restricting development rights, which over time could be very valuable, or now currently are very valuable. So, you may still have some kind of good value. I've seen appraisers where they ignored the timber value and just looked at the development potential, just because the development potential was so much higher than the timber value. In that area, in that particular area. That may not be true of your property, Kathy. I don't know, but I would, I wouldn't lose hope. But you may find that,
Yeah.
But
well, cannabis pressures are really high in our area. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Where are you located?
Next to the Freys, at the north end of Redwood Valley.
Oh, you said that. Yeah. So likely you'd still have a lot of, if it's a large property and it has a number of potential legal parcels or could be subdivided, you probably have some value in there depending on the size, etc.
Yeah, I actually am I can't subdivide, I don't think, but anyhow, that's all right. It's just, I'm just trying to get more of the picture. What,
Right.
is there any advantage on getting restoration grants if land is preserved in a conservation easement? I mean, one of the things I'm seeing as an impact, is there's needs to be a lot more reforestation, and there are programs to help with that, but there's also things like invasion of Scotch broom and
Right.
there's all kinds of things that are going to take more stewardship at this point.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know enough about those type of programs, but I meant to say early on that conservation easements are just one way. They're a great tool for protecting someone's land, but they're not the only conservation tool out there. I mean, there are other programs, like you say, to restore your land. There's a soils program that I don't think is through the Department of Conservation. I'm just getting involved in that now through RCDs and stuff. I wish I knew more about it, but there's funding to help people do to sequester carbon and stuff like that. Do those kind of programs.
I guess I have one more question relating to carbon sequestration. My son was asking,
Sure.
Well, if we have it in a conservation easement, then are we not eligible to do carbon sequestration tax credits if with land that still has that value?
It depends. He may be right or may be wrong. I mean, I know we did a large project in Napa County where you couldn't get both credit for your carbon rights, plus they did a carbon right thing plus an easement. So the easement allowed all forestry timber practices. In other words, they didn't restrict any of the timber so that they could get money from the carbon
Yeah, okay.
program.
So
yeah,
okay.
That's right.
Yeah, that's probably right. Thank you.
You can double dip, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I figured.
So, sure.
I'll throw in there, that's the Department of Food and Ag's Healthy Soils Program, I think is what you're talking about.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Which the RCDs are technical assistance providers. So if anyone needs help with that, let me know. I actually had a question. You kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but I guess it's a bit more specific. If you really were passionate about healthy soils and about organic ag, and can you mandate that anyone else in the future in perpetuity practices kind of strict protocols on how they farm in a way that you approve?
You can have organic and it's again the easy way. You can do a management. The easy is just to have it all be negative. Can't use pesticides, can't use this, in other words, you do an organic farm positive terms. You do the management plan kind of organic farm based on the management plan. Right.
We have an easement that restricts any kind of toxic materials. So any, say, house paint that is on the property has to be removed within 30 days of use. And no inorganic herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers can be used in the soils.
Right. Yeah, I've seen easements like that. We've done in the Central Valley. There are organic easements, definitely agricultural easements. And you might, I don't know. It may be that they may appraise it slightly higher. I don't know that for sure because it's a more restrictive easement. The more rights you give away, that can be monetized, the higher your obviously your appraisal will be. That's why those Swainson Hawk easements are a lot more valuable than strict agricultural easements, another 10 or 20% higher. Because you're really, if they're being done in a place where people could easily convert the lands to almond orchards, for instance, and they have to forego that, then they get more value.
Thanks. I think we have time for maybe one more question if anyone has it, or some concluding thoughts. Maybe not. Okay.
Great talk, Tom. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for having me. This is really great. I learned a lot from you all. You too. Your projects are beautiful. They're really, it's a great mix. What a great county Mendocino is.
Yeah,
So,
Mendocino County is a pretty beautiful place.
it is. It sure is. Yeah.
And we
All right,
didn't get
everyone.
into the coast yet.
What's that?
The Mendocino Land Trust has this huge amount of property on the coast with beautiful
Oh, yeah.
scenic ocean views and majestic redwoods and
Right. Right.
yeah.
Throughout your, between all the land trusts and some of the larger organizations, I know the Conservation Fund has some big properties and stuff. And of course, it's a big river. And yeah, it's pretty cool how many properties have been protected in your county. So, all right. Well, nice talking to everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you,
everybody.
Katie,
All
for
right.
hosting this.
Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Night.
Sure.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.